I want to give some thoughts about the interaction between Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig that happened at a debate or talk up in Canada a while ago. Jordan Peterson is a really interesting person, especially in regards to his relationship to Christianity. He's definitely not an Orthodox Christian, but he has an openness that has invited unlikely skeptics to consider Christianity in a fresh way. Peterson has interacted with a lot of people from many different backgrounds, and some of these interactions have become quite viral. For example, in January of 2018, Peterson gave an interview to Kathy Newman in the UK that just exploded on YouTube, and it would be worth watching that because a lot of interesting things are happening there. In fact, it's Kathy Newman's fight for ideological dominance that actually exposes her own narrow way of non-thinking. This interview launched Peterson into a world spotlight. So here are a couple thoughts I have about how Peterson interacted with William Lane Craig in this talk that happened in January of 2018. Peterson actually stands out from the annoying white noise of talking heads in our culture because he refuses to let an ideology do his thinking for him. People don't know what to make of Peterson because he's not easily labeled. He's not really left-wing or right-wing. He's not really Christian or non-Christian. He has naturalistic leanings, but he's also very open to more transcendent realities. His actual thoughts are developed from creative interaction with other great thinkers of the past. He's not just a persona aping some group think. The thing that stood out most to me in the interaction with Craig and Peterson was that Craig seemed to be reacting to the stated question not authentically, but as an ideology that was embodied by him. The affect of his presentation seemed staged and inauthentic. Peterson, on the other hand, spoke to the audience. He personalized his message. As I was listening to Craig's speech, I realized I could go out and get one of his books and find the exact same presentation he was giving. As Peterson was talking, however, I realized there was something spontaneous about it. He was formulating arguments on the spot. It was a bit like jazz music. He had the structure of his argument, but he was improvising to let it fit the needs for the moment. At a deeper level, I think something really important was happening here. I've recently been working through a book by James K.A. Smith called How Not to Be Secular, which is a summary of Charles Taylor's ideas, who is also a Canadian. Our secular age, according to Taylor and Smith, is characterized by contested beliefs. These contested beliefs exist in the foreground of an invisible backdrop. Taylor uses the word imaginary as the implicit way we think and see the world. In short, the pre-modern world had an imaginary that was ultimately transcendent. There was a God who did things and demanded things. There were spirits all around. People were porous selves. They were open to interacting with God and these spirits and were also open to interactions with each other. Today, however, we live in a social imaginary that exists within an immanent frame. We are boxed in by material nature. People within this frame are buffered rather than porous, like an astronaut on a spacewalk. We're insulated from the atmosphere around us. We are self-contained and self-sufficient. Here comes another idea where Peterson is hard to classify. Peterson is unapologetically Darwinian. Natural selection explains a lot, if not everything, according to him. His commitment to Darwinism, however, exists, as I think, within a pre-modern imaginary. I've never seen Peterson comment on this directly, but I would guess that he holds to porous selves which exist within a transcendent cosmos. In reality, then, Peterson and Craig both hold to very similar metaphysical frameworks. So why are their approaches so different? What is happening here, in my opinion, is that Craig is trying to make a recognition and acceptance of the pre-modern imaginary a precondition of accepting his premise that God is the key to personal meaning. One must, according to Craig, give up the modern social imaginary of the immanent frame and buffered self to have meaning. Peterson, on the other hand, applies a strategy of working from within the modern social imaginary. After all, since this imaginary is simply held, people don't even realize they're living according to it. When Craig attacks the backdrop of naturalism, he is attacking something that people have breathed in without logical cognition. People don't hold on to the modern social imaginary because they've concluded that it is true. They hold it because they don't know anything different. It's just the way it is. It's taken for granted. It's not believed because it is supported by solid evidence. Peterson, on the other hand, and I don't know if he's conscious of this, starts from where the person is. If you are a buffered self in an immanent frame, fine. Peterson doesn't supply a new ideology that will replace an old ideology. He gives us an idea. His line of reasoning goes something like this. You are a self. And even if you think you are buffered, that is, insulated from the world, you have to admit that something does penetrate your being. The most obvious invader of yourself is suffering. You don't need to think this suffering has some transcendent cause. You just need to acknowledge that something is getting into your being from the outside. So what do you do with that? At the most basic level, Peterson is saying that you take responsibility for that suffering. It might not be your fault, but once it hits you, it is your responsibility. If you're suffering, for example, from a headache, stand up, go get some Tylenol and swallow it. There. You have done what is in your control to deal with something that is out of your control. When you take control of the little things in your life, the big things become a little less controlling. Pretty basic stuff, but stuff that our culture of victimhood refuses to take to heart. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The simple yet profound strategy of taking control of the uncontrollable in order to minimize the impact of that uncontrollable is found in the wisdom of the ages, according to Peterson. In fact, the clearest and most complex and impressive expression is found, wait for it, in the Bible. And the greatest message of the Bible is that order, which takes ultimate control of the chaos out there, is truth. Specifically, speaking truth is the only thing that can free us from the trappings of deadly ideologies that exist as the uncontrollable or the chaotic out there. And the greatest example of truth speaking in all of Western civilization is Jesus Christ. As far as I can tell, Peterson's message is compelling because it recognizes that everyone wants to be authentic. They want to be free to think and speak for themselves. The greatest example of truth speaking and truth living is Jesus Christ. Entertaining this proposal does not require anyone to demolish their naturalistic social imaginary before agreeing to follow Jesus' way. Once people admire Jesus, they might consider imitating him. The next step might be to embody Jesus' life, which could include spiritual transformation. In summary, I think we need to be very careful when we imply that people need to adopt a rationalistic, metaphysical change before they can experience a personal change in outlook, which would later lead to a metaphysical transformation.